It is two totally different things to have beautiful photos that you can then look back on your day and think like, well, the day wasn't perfect, but the photos are.
Yeah,
and that's never my goal. My goal is to have photos that are reflective of like how fun it actually was to be there. And so that's why my job has never been only about taking the incredible photos. I never want that photo to be a mask of a shitty experience.
All right, well, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
I have been a huge fan of yours for a really long time, but I think the first time that I really started following you and seeing what you were up to was after I saw you at the Local Talks event last year.
Yeah, that was a good one.
One thing that really like stands out to me is, and I think you said it in one of your podcasts, but it was like, there's a reason why the brides that you have tend to follow you even after the wedding day, and it's because of the experience that you create for them, right?
Yeah. So, and the bond that you can create with them during your time working together. Absolutely. It's kind of an interesting thing when somebody gets to be a part, like almost on the sidelines, but then at the same time they get to be at the heart of a celebration that you're having, and that, like, I'm in the room with these women while they're getting into their wedding dresses. So am I gonna hold a piece of their heart forever? Probably, if that experience was as I hoped it was. And in the most cases, there are people that I become friends with later on and stay in touch with and get to follow their stories. But Local Talks was really cool, especially that one, because it was really wedding industry focused. Yeah. So I feel like we got to get into a really good conversation about, you know, our job in terms of the wedding industry and how we can really push that forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the main reasons I really wanted to have you on too is just that I think a lot of brides tend to put like the visuals first, but I think we need to like dial it back and actually think of it in a different way where like the experience comes before the pretty pictures. And if you have those pretty pictures, if you didn't have a great experience, then you're never gonna...
Well, I think it's important to have both.
Yes.
It has to. Your work has to be there, but people only talk about your business if you are having that good experience and if they're having that incredible experience. Yeah. So there are people with those incredibly curated feeds who have done the work to present themselves as these incredible brands. But if nobody's talking about them, and if no other vendors are out there talking about them and how it's a really important decision to work with that person, those are gonna stay pretty feeds forever, and they're not gonna turn into successful businesses. That's like one really big thing, is you kind of have to have both. And I also know that it's most valuable for me to work on both of those things equally. I do have to polish up the look of my business, especially if it's a visual field as a photographer. So I have to constantly be showing work, and it has to always be good, better than good. And but then I also have to make sure that the clients are having an incredible experience. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that to make sure that both pieces are running equally. Yeah.
So let's dial it back a little bit, because I realize we haven't even gotten into like who are you, and just like tell us a little bit about how you got started.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Laura Kelly, and I'm a wedding photographer. I've been doing that for 9 years. Well, actually 9 seasons, 8 years. I always think of my life in seasons, because that's how, when I first started my business, I jumped right into it on a wedding season. I started in June, and I was up and shooting weddings that July and August. So it all happened really quickly. But yeah, I've been doing it for 9 years. I love it. I rebranded myself I was kind of accepting any and all work at one point, as do most photographers kind of when they start. And then I decided to specialize, and I decided to rebrand myself as a boutique wedding photographer. I don't use that term as much anymore, but back in 2013, that was like the word, meaning that you had a good experience as well as a good piece of art. But then at the same time, I also rebranded as the photographer for happy people. And that was probably the most pivotal decision in my business that got me to be the photographer that I am today, is that decision to know exactly what type of clientele I wanted to work with, exactly what type of experience I wanted to have, and who I wanted my business to be about. And what's cool is that over those years, it's actually the people that I've worked with, the brides that I've shot, and those women that I've been able, and men, but it's largely a women-driven field. Yeah. It's all about the bride. And I've been able to create those women as like micro celebs of my business. Yeah. And so these women, even if their wedding was 5 years ago, I still get texts from them saying like, somebody on the street just passed me and was like, "You're a Laura Kelly bride." So they still get known and that kind of thing in like this weird little micro industry. But yeah, so I've been doing that. And then about 2 years ago, I decided that I wanted to have some sort of an outlet to be able to share what I had learned in the course of developing my photography business, but as it related to more industries and more fields than just photography specifically. So I decided to start a podcast. And the podcast was going to be my journey of kind of discovering how the skills that I had learned can actually be transferred to a lot of other businesses. And through that process of just sharing my story and sharing the things that I had learned, giving marketing tips, giving advice for having an awesome client experience, giving advice on raising a family and having a marriage, and breaking up with your best friend if you need to, and all the crazy topics that I've talked about on the podcast. In the course of that, I realized that I do have a passion for helping other entrepreneurs get the business of their dreams and really make that happen. And so then it led me to my work, which is more recent, as a business coach. So I kind of do all of those things.
All of the things.
At this point.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit how, like, has this goal of yours to create an experience, has that always been the case, like from the get-go, or is that something that how has it evolved over time?
Totally. Well, when I was new, there's not a ton of thought that goes into like the how and the why. It's just do. It's just like you go to your first shoot and you do that, and then somebody asks, can you do a baptism or a graduation? You go, sure, I can do that, I guess. And then you do it and you go, I'm never going to do this again, because that's the worst. And so you kind of go through those stages of your business in the early side, and you realize what you do love and what you don't. And then only when you get better at something and you start to get feedback from somebody. So it would have been the first time that I got a feedback from someone saying, wow, you were not only like an amazing photographer, and we're so happy with our collection of photos, but we're so thrilled with the way that you were able to enter into our celebration, the energy that you were able to, pour into our day, how you were able to keep us organized, how you were able to deal with my mom, how you were able to do all of these things. And when you start getting feedback like that, you realize, okay, that's special. Yeah. And that's what I always tell my clients as well, is like, when you're looking for what makes you special, you need to be searching that feedback. You need to be looking at what people tell you again and again and again. And when you start hearing the same thing over and over, that's what's so special about your business. And that's what you need to then get on the top of a roof and with like a megaphone announce what it is that makes you special. Yeah. I think a lot of people are receiving feedback and they're getting incredible advice at what makes them unique, what makes their business really successful. But maybe their businesses would actually be a little bit more fast-paced. They'd be a little bit closer to where they want to be if they said that out loud. That's tricky, because you don't want to come off as like, hey, I'm amazing. But that's your job when you're trying to grow your business. So over time, that client experience really changed. It developed. At the beginning, I was not what I would call running the show. Now, I run the show. And that running of the show is not just on the wedding day. It's from the beginning. It's the fact that when my clients sit down with me for a consult, and again, this is where my very first consult, did I run the show? No, because I was like, hi, please hire me. And I was just waiting for them to ask questions so that I could answer. And now when I sit down with a client, I'm welcoming them into my space versus us meeting at like a coffee shop or a third party's place. But I've done consults where I meet them at their living room, and that very much felt like I couldn't run the show. Now all of my consults are in my home, so I'm welcoming clients into my space, and they get the sense that I'm running that show very early on by me saying like, okay, tell me a little bit about this, or what's the decision to do this, or what kind of feel are you guys looking for? And I'm almost the interviewer when we're meeting, instead of me saying like, so you have questions about photography, and sitting back and waiting for them.
And I think it just gives people peace of mind. I think a lot of brides and, just couples in general are like so overwhelmed by the process. And sometimes it's just so refreshing to have someone just like walk you through the steps,
Not only refreshing, like you're exhausted. You're a bride who's been dealing with difficult emails back and forth with people, some businesses who aren't even messaging you back. Yeah. You're dealing with people who are then, as you meet them, you're disappointed with what they offer, or you're disappointed that it's not a personality match. When you meet someone and you can relax and you don't have to be asking the questions and you feel that you're at home and that this person is going to be in charge for you, that feeling of having somebody else run the show, I know for sure that all of my brides and my clients are just so excited that they have one really easy wedding vendor. And my goal is to set them up with other really easy wedding vendors. A lot of the people that I know are going to be a part of this series. So I was really excited to hear who else was going to be involved, because I feel like it's a big part of my job too, to help steer them to other vendors who are going to treat them the same.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm actually super curious. How do you distinguish your role from like that of a wedding planner? And do you feel like sometimes you might step on their toes, or like how do you navigate that relationship with a wedding planner?
So actually my clients only work with a wedding planner maybe 33% of the time.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe like 1 in 3 weddings, there will be a wedding planner on board. Whenever there is, I'm so excited. I love when there is a wedding planner involved, and I make sure that they know that I will be working with their planner on things like their timeline. But if my clients don't have a planner, that's where I kind of can step in and say, I've created some resources for you that are going to be really impactful and really helpful for you in this process to get your own timeline created. So I would never want to make a bride feel like you need a planner, and if you don't have one, this is a mistake that you're making. I want them to feel like if a planner is a good fit for them, that I will work with that person. If they don't, we can still have an incredible event and we can still have a really successful day that flows really well. And that timeline knowledge is just experience. It's experience alone. It's having done a million different timelines. It's having organized things 100 million different ways, seen what works, seen what doesn't, and just knowing 9 years later how long it takes for me to do something, how long it takes for an average ceremony to happen, things like that.
Right. And I know that over email you had mentioned that you've kind of developed like a process or like a system for you that works. And so I'm just curious to know a little bit more about that.
Like that back end kind of
stuff? Yeah. How do you go about it?
So I think every time, one of the things I really try to do is every single time I get a question from a client, I now need to figure out a way that question doesn't need to be asked again.
Right.
And when you repeat that process again and again, what you've ultimately done is created a bunch of resources that are really easy for that client to use. And it ties into exactly what I was saying before about running that show. When you make someone feel like you're running that show, it's largely because you have so many resources that they can go after. So for example, if I were to get an email from a client that says, hey, what should we be wearing for our engagement? I know that when I'm answering that, I'm going to take a couple extra minutes to answer that question in a really thorough way, then take that information and put it onto a blog post. And that's where I think a lot of people are doing that. Here's where they stop. And this is where I would go even one step further. And instead of just creating that blog post that has that resource for them, I would then set up an email that's going to go out to every single client who hasn't yet done their engagement session and say, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I've created a resource for you about what to wear for your session. Take a look at it. If there's a piece missing, if there are any other questions you still have, I'd love to know about them so I can add that resource and make it even better for the clients in the future. And just taking it that one step further, I think a lot of people settle into I have an answer for any question that gets asked. And I prefer, let's set these clients up so that they don't even have any questions. Right? Down to things like, what do we do if it rains? Perfect. I'm going to message a client every week before their session saying, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I haven't looked at the weather. I don't look at the weather. I feel like it's a bad luck. But at the same time, I wanted to let you know what the protocol is going to be for next week for your session. And the fact I can tell you 100% that when you're a bride who has an engagement session next week, there's a part of you that wonders if your photographer even knows. And to get that email from them saying hey, I'm looking forward to your session next week, you're like, wow, I'm important. She's excited to work with me. So it just changes the tone. And then, that kind of process gets repeated all the way, including our timeline discussion. I used to meet with clients in person to discuss our timeline. Once I had a family, once I had kids, it was the kind of thing that having those extra 22 appointments in the year just wasn't going to work. So they became phone calls. So now I have a podcast resource for them, all about starting their draft for their timeline. They use that podcast resource to create that draft before we have our call. It sounds very thorough, but there's been a lot of time.
I'm obsessed with that podcast episode. It's it was super, super helpful even for me who I'm not engaged or anything, but just, it was super, super helpful.
That kind of inside perspective.
And as a videographer, I think like, you know, like there's more and more of us, but I don't, but it's nice to have that kind
insight.
of, and to give them that if they do need it, right?
Yeah. And speaking of working with videographers, actually, I wanted to touch on that because it is kind of a unique perspective to have two people who use similar gear but are doing two totally different things. I totally agree. And so one thing that I get asked all the time from brides is like, are you okay with working with videographers? And my answer is always yes. And my answer is you don't want to hire someone who doesn't know what they're doing, because a lot of people think I've spent good money on my photos. And so I know the photos are going to be amazing. So any Bush League videographer that I have join me is going to be fine because we already have good photos. And so if we get anything out of that video choice, that's just a bonus. And I'm like, that is super backwards. That is super backwards. That's like getting a really incredible kitchen and then putting in like really shitty old appliances. Right? Like you just wouldn't do that. You've come so far. Like just keep going.
Exactly.
And so working with videographers has been something that at the beginning it wasn't as prominent. Now more of my clients are using videographers, which I love and appreciate. And I've also learned how to give direction and shoot so that my videographers are really happy when they're working with me. I used to shoot a lot with just like stills and just like subtle poses, and because I give so much direction, I can get really focused on just giving them like micro movements to do and like micro changes to make. And because I had to start working with videographers more, I had to learn to shoot in a way that was all about movement. And shoot and get the poses that I needed as part of larger movements. And so I feel like it really helped me push my craft. And I'm better at shooting even without video because of that knowledge of having done that experience.
No, I think I totally agree. And I think like everyone wins when everyone's working together.
Joint mission.
Yes, exactly.
The joint mission is about the couple we have. It's about Brittany and Zach. Always. Like that's our joint mission. It's about Nathan and Kristen. And like that's our people that we are together with, right? And so when you have a person who is on your team like that in video, like it can be really impactful. I've worked with some bad videographers.
And everyone has like that horror story of like a videographer that they work with. And I'm like, that's something that I'm like literally on a mission to try to like bust is like, I am not like those videographers that you hear about. And
and the way that you can do that, right, we know from experience, is by making a client feel like you know what you're doing, that you are prioritizing the same things that they are prioritizing, and that you actually respect the photographer that they've chosen, if you do. If not, that sucks, but that you actually respect their choices in other ways, and that your job is not to try and upstage a photographer, get in a photographer's way, get better shots than them, but it is about this community.
Absolutely.
And so I think when a client feels that, they can pick up on that. And it's true because part of your job is to like build that trust there with them.
And it's kind of a selfish question on my end, but how would you suggest?
Ask away. I love it.
How would you suggest that videographers maybe step up their client experience game? Like, is it different from photographers, or like, just what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so right away, it's funny because I just recorded a podcast episode about this, but right away, I think we could all be doing better at sharing our message. And that sounds very preachy. It sounds very from like down south, not that message. But we could all be doing a better job of communicating to our clients the things that we currently take for granted about our own work. So whenever I speak with a client, especially in coaching, and we kind of work on their social media strategy with them, a lot of the things that come up are them saying, well, I've already shared this information, and so I don't know if I need to reshare that. I've already told clients that this is what I offer and this is what I do or this is my value. And my message to them is like, when did you tell them and what are the chances that they saw it? And we need to be in a cycle of constantly refreshing and recycling that content and that information, because chances are it wasn't seen the first time. And even if it was, it's okay to have that message recycled. I always use the example of like, if you think of a brand who creates a commercial, is there hope that you see this commercial one time and you never see it again? No, opposite. They want you to see this commercial everywhere. And so that's where, when we go through that process of figuring out what is it that makes our business special, what is it that makes us unique, what are clients saying about us, it becomes our job to express that 100 million times over for as long as we want to be in business, right? And so for a planner, for example, if I was being asked the same question, I would say, okay, what are the types of things that people are maybe misconceiving about your business? Or what are the questions that you get asked over and over and over again? What are the things that you need to prove to someone when you're sitting down with them for a consult? And if there's a recurring pattern of something that you need to prove, either why it's worth their time, it's worth their money, why you're better than your competition, whatever it is that you're trying to prove, instead of waiting until you're in a place for a consult to do that proving, that's your job for that whole entire process that leads up to it. There has to be a component that does that achieves that proof on your website. There has to be a component that achieves it in your authentic voice that you're using on social media. Yeah. There has to be that type of proof that appears in every single part of your whole client experience. So for me, it's that there's a lot of things that I'm trying to prove. As with any business, there's a lot of things that kind of go into that larger message. For me, one of them is that I work with happy people. And so I need to be constantly proving that my clients are having a good time, and I need to be showing that. I need to be working with people who really understand that I do run a show, and if they want to run the show, it might not be a good fit for us. If they want to be handing me a big portfolio of like, here are the Pinterest images that I want to recreate, I'm not the photographer for you. And it's important that clients kind of know that difference. And then if it's all about proving like why it's valuable, that's where I need to be screaming from the rooftops the experiences that my clients have had in the past, and how actually these small little things that I take for granted that I consider are what makes it unique and special.
Yeah, and on that similar like topic, I mean, maybe tell us about a couple situations that you've encountered where like you going above and beyond has actually made like one heck of a difference for someone.
Oh yeah, one heck of a difference for sure. And there's not just one story that comes to mind, there's a lot. But I have a paragraph on my website that's called More Than Wedding Photography. And it appears on my info page because I think it's important when they see my price, which is higher for my demographic, it's higher comparatively for the industry. And I think it's important to let them know that what's in that package is not just the things listed, being an engagement session, your collection of digital images, this, your album, stuff like that. I think it's important for them to also understand that like, if you need someone to kick your mom out of the room because she's being annoying, and you tell me that she's being annoying, it's not just me being like, your mom's annoying, she needs to get out. But if there's an awkward conversation that you want to have, I will have it on your behalf. And there's a testimonial that appears on my website as well that kind of, and this is exactly what I mean when it's like, if this is what makes you unique, you have to be screaming from the rooftops. That's my version of that. There's a testimonial on my site that says, you literally removed a bobby pin from your own hair and put it into mine. And she's like, and that's just one of the ways that you were so ready to like be a helpful person for me, and that she felt that. That is the smallest example of a larger picture. The bigger picture is me being the person who will actually get in there and like help you do up your dress. Or if I hear mumblings from the bride about how she kind of hates this one orange flower in her bouquet, I'll be like, do you want me to cut it out for you? You'd be surprised how many brides are like so scared to touch their bouquet because they're like, well, like I don't know how to do this. Because I've seen, hundreds of bouquets. I'm like, do you want me to yank this flower? And they're like, would you? Like, oh my God, that would be incredible. And I'm like, perfect, let's get it out of here. And just the smallest little changes like that. Brides often will need validation in some way. They need to be told certain things that they're unsure about. They need for you to tell them certain things so that they can feel really calm. They need a person who's going to be running those family photos so that it's not awkward, that they don't want the girl who's not married to their brother to be in the shots. Like, you need a person who's going to be running this show. And there are a lot of really important dynamics that if you screw up those dynamics, those are stories that are going to be told forever. Right? If you accidentally like piss off your sister-in-law who's like just, dating your brother and you don't actually like her, that's going to come up again and again as like a memory for your wedding. And I just want my girls to have the most incredible memories forever 100%. Of their weddings. There's a lot of stuff that goes in there.
And so what are some telltale signs that can kind of like tell them whether or not maybe the photographer that they're considering is
Bush League?
Well, no, but like honestly, because sometimes it's not super clear. So how can they distinguish like the good photographers from the not so good ones?
So right away, I think like not everyone's going to get a good photographer. I think that's totally fine, right? And that might not be your priority. And if that's not your priority, then like do you get your Algonquin student, get someone who's newer, get someone, my advice would be, even if you're on the lower end of that bracket, get someone who's really excited about the opportunity of working with you. I would put way more stock in a photographer who was like really new and had really low prices because they were emerging and they're trying hard versus someone who has been around for a while. They're not great, so they're affordable. The passion was never there probably. And like if you were comparing two people and one of them has a lot of proof that they've been able to produce this mediocre product for years and one of them has nothing to show you, but they're hungry for it and you meet them and you've connected with them, pick this person 100 times because I've been this person.
Yeah.
I'm self-taught.
Yeah.
So the last photography training that I took was grade 11 in high school, and it was taught by the gym teacher, Mr. Adams. So that was my last photography training. Since then, I've been self-taught. So in 2011, there was a wedding where I worked where I was that girl who was hungry. And I was that girl who was charging $800 for 14-hour coverage. And I worked shit out of it. Like, it was incredible. And because I was really, like, I wanted to make that happen because I was trying to emerge for my own career, I worked that much harder than someone who was maybe charging like a similar price point that doesn't love it.
Right.
Now, as you move up into like the higher price points, my advice is look for consistency.
Yeah.
Because if you look for a photographer that's proving consistency to you, you are putting a faith in them to deliver the same product that you think you're gonna get and have them actually return that product to you at the end.
Yeah.
So if you see a photographer and sometimes they post photos that have green tones in them, sometimes they post photos that are more like vintage sepia vibes, sometimes they post like really, this is still around. I'll tell you who after.
Sure.
But this is the kind of thing where if you are never really sure what the next photo they're gonna post is, or if you see a shot and you don't know it's theirs, the thing I hear again and again is someone will be like, I saw this photo on my Explore page, like I knew it was yours.
Yeah.
Because it is all about consistency.
You do have a very like distinguishable look and feel to
Yeah. And it's pretty rare that a photo is going to come up and the girls are going to go like, oh, that's not what I thought that you were going to post. And I think that's important because then you know what it is that you're buying. Right? And so if you were to be shopping for something on Amazon and you were to be looking through and all the pictures look slightly different of what it is that you're buying, like if you're buying a product and all the pictures look like they're weird different sizes, you're like, I don't even know, I have no faith in what I'm going to get. Versus when you see something and it's super clear what it is that you're going to receive. Yeah, and I think you need to meet the person.
Yeah.
Ooh, fatal mistake too is I think when brides run into a potential issue is when they go to something like a wedding show. And they're there to maybe find a DJ, maybe they're there to try on dresses, and they make the mistake of thinking that the photographers who are there or the videographers who are there, or really any industry, the planners, the invitation designers, are an accurate reflection of what's available in the marketplace. If you step into a place like a wedding show and you take the 5, 6, 10 photographers that are there and you consider this as you've done your due diligence in the industry of what's available to you, you're missing a big chunk of the picture. Yeah. And so I've had a couple, more than usual, I've had a higher rate of clients this year come to me and say, we've placed a deposit with somebody else and we've realized that we're unhappy with our decision and we're going to be eating that cost, and now we're going to be booking with you because we thought we had done our research because we looked at who was available at the show and there was nobody in the higher bracket at the show. And so that I think is something too. Like, I'd recommend, you can look for DJs at wedding shows, you can look for dresses at wedding shows. I wouldn't go and think that you've done your due diligence on any other categories.
No, I completely agree. What is your process? What does it look like after the wedding day? How do you stay in touch with your couples?
So for me, that process starts really right after the wedding day. And you'll always have a sneak peek from me within 24 hours. And that will begin the process of your sneak peek week. And sneak peek week means you see a photo every single day, or at least over that first week, you see at least 6 to 7 shots of your wedding. And I think that's a super important part of what's happening in like our current world, where people are used to seeing something now. You go to a conference on Thursday, you're expecting to see shots on Friday. You go to someone's wedding on Saturday, you want to see a professional shot of them in their dress on Monday morning.
Before Aunt Mary posts like a cell phone picture.
And, like, I hate Aunt Mary, so like we need to make sure that our photo tops her photo, right? The worst thing that could ever happen to me as a bride would make Aunt Mary's photo her profile picture. I would rather die. So it's not that I'm only producing sneak peeks quickly, but it's that I'm picking the right shots. It's gotta be the one that's gonna be her profile picture. It's gotta be the one that she is gonna reshare because she looks amazing. And so that sneak peek process starts them off on that understanding of like, this is gonna be an incredible after experience as well. And whenever I talk to photographers who will ask me like, how do you get so many sneak peeks out so quickly? I struggle with that because I'm like, it is not that hard. No. It really is not. You're telling me that when you make a coffee on Sunday morning for yourself, you can't find the time to edit 7 photos and just put them all on your phone on day one. Put all of those 6, 7 photos on your phone on day one and then slow release or send them all. Sometimes I get really excited and I send them all out to her in a text message on that Sunday. Yeah. It's just always a different experience. One of the things that's changed too from when I first started my business is my digital product used to be the only takeaway, used to be the only deliverable. But probably about 2016 was a shift for me when I started to include albums in every single package. Now I still have the option where you can decide whether the album is not a good fit for you. It's not my place to say that an album is something that everyone needs, but it's something that I realized was a really important part of the process for me and for them. And that if they didn't have that pressure of, I've already paid for my album, so it's time for me to choose my photos, that album wasn't going to get made for another decade, and maybe never. Right?
And that's, again, when we were talking earlier about like, it comes down to like, we are the experts in this situation, and you need to be leading them, and they don't know necessarily what they want, right? Until you provide them with options. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the album has just been a great touch point for me because I've been able to hand deliver this box that has a note about how, you know, that album's going to get flipped through on anniversaries, and it's going to get flipped through by their kids, and that it's going to become this heirloom piece. And I think what's cool is that we're starting to have an appreciation for heirlooms, especially as they relate to like photo and video. Think of how kids growing up today have video, like really accurate video footage of them, whereas mine is like on dusty tapes in my parents' house. Yeah. But kids right now are growing up with their lives documented, and we can appreciate the need for that, especially when we've just done a wedding, because we've created a table that has photos of our grandparents' weddings, right? And every time I see that, every time I see a table of like legacy, parents' weddings, siblings' weddings, grandparents' weddings, great-grandparents' weddings, I think my photo is gonna be on a table in like vintage black and white, or it's gonna be in vibrant color in like 50 years, 100 years. That's crazy.
That's crazy.
That's really
and
cool.
So cool. Yeah. I feel the same about video too. It's like one of those things that it's, again, people don't realize the value of it, but I was just telling my team that one of the last weddings of my season, there were 2 people who passed away on the bride's side within like a month of the wedding. You can't really see those things.
You can't understand the importance until you need it. And they were probably so grateful to have coverage and footage.
Now they have like their full ceremony, and it's like those things are just, it's like invaluable to me.
And my impression of that too is that it is 2 totally different things to create, to have beautiful photos that you can then look back on your day and think like, well, the day wasn't perfect, but the photos are. Yeah, and that's never my goal. My goal is to have photos that are reflective of like how fun it actually was to be there. And so that's why my job has never been only about taking the incredible photos. It's about what was everyone's mood and vibe when we were shooting wedding party photos. And trust me, to be able to get a client say like, one of my favorite parts of the day was when we were shooting family photos, I feel like, oh my God, like I've worked a miracle, right? Because that can be a moment where it's really stressful. Painful, it can be painful, especially when your sister-in-law, you hate her and like she's gonna try to be in every photo. It's like, it's really tough. But when we can manage those situations and we can have fun in that, then when they look at their family photos, they're not thinking about how they were yelling at their dad 5 seconds before it was taken. I never want that photo to be a mask of a shitty experience.
Oh man, this was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today. How can people stay in touch with you?
For sure. So you can find my photography work, Laura Kelly Photography. The website is laurakellyphotography.ca. Or on Instagram, I'm at Laura Kelly Weddings. I share, during the wedding season, I can share up to 5 Instagram posts a day. It's crazy because I'm just trying to share as much as possible. But my portfolios are constantly changing and being updated. You can learn a ton about my photography business from that website. Or my personal side of things at laurakelly.co on Instagram, which is also the website, laurakelly.co. And I share a lot of kind of how wedding photography gets wrapped up into a whole bunch of other things. My personal life, my podcast stuff, my coaching business, my regular life, vacations, friendships, marriages, business, life, all the things. So that's where you can find me, at laurakelly.co on Instagram would be a good place to start.
Amazing.
Yeah. And then the podcast is called You Might Not Like It. So tune in. I have a couple episodes that are specifically really helpful for brides. I have episode 28, I can point out in particular, is all about your engagement session and preparing for your engagement session, not only with like what to wear and that kind of thing, because that's more of a visual answer, but how that experience is going to go. And some things about what I wish all my brides knew about that session before it actually started. And then I also have an episode on the photography timeline. So if you go to laurakelly.co/timelines, you'll find that one. And it's a really in-depth look at how to start working your draft, regardless of who your planner is, who your photographer is. The content in that podcast episode is going to be super valuable, just in terms of, you know, all these things that you might not know about how that prep is going to go in the morning, or things about ceremonies that we don't really get to see, things about that photo time that you might not know unless you've already done it. So it's a really helpful piece of content, and I'm always making more podcast episodes for brides. So
I mean, even as someone in the industry, I learned a ton, like I said, from that podcast episode. Awesome. And so thank you so much. And we'll make sure to include all the links in the description.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.